So at 4 minutes past the hour, I think we can begin. Honorable members of the steering committee, colleagues, friends, good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition Steering Committee. I am delighted to welcome you here today and the countries you represent. My name is Alan Fox. I'm the director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the United Nations Development Program and co-lead of the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition. I'm here together with with a number of our colleagues, but my esteemed colleague, Rob McCouch, UNICEF Director of Evaluation, who will also join me in orchestrating our meeting here today. So we have the honor of addressing you on behalf of the coalition that UNDP spearheads together with UNICEF. The coalition currently has 42 UN entities, a growing number of member states, civil society organizations, private sector foundations, and global evaluation and synthesis networks. Today's meeting holds great significance as we formally welcome you, our esteemed steering committee. Under your guidance, the coalition aims to provide lessons and insights to help accelerate progress towards the achievement of the 2030 agenda. Your guidance over the next few years is vital to ensure the update of lessons produced by the syntheses that we are developing. Before we get into today's proceedings, let me take a moment just to go over the agenda with you. I will first be asking the honorable members to introduce themselves and say a few brief words about the key learning needs that they believe the synthesis should consider, and of course, any initial issues or questions that come to your mind. And also your perspectives, we certainly will be welcoming as these are invaluable in shaping the work. After that, my colleague Ana Rosa Suarez, UNDP IEO Chief of Evaluation, Synthesis and Lessons, who's leading the Coalition Secretariat, will explain the proposed roles and responsibilities of the steering committee and outline the plans for the high-level political forum in July, as well as the September SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future. These events are opportunities to share the synthesis lessons, exchange knowledge, and broaden collaboration. And we welcome your insights on ways to use these occasions to take concrete steps towards our goals. Next on the agenda is going to be a presentation of the initial findings from the first synthesis on the partnerships pillar from Thomas DeHoop of the American Institute of Research. Directly after the presentation, there will be an opportunity to discuss the findings and progress that we've made on the partnership pillar, which, as you know, focuses on SDG 17. Pertinent observations will be taken on board by the synthesis team, so we encourage you to tell us what you think. After that, the co-chairs of the remaining 4 syntheses will give a very brief update on the progress they've made, and we'll then open the floor for the committee to discuss fundraising opportunities. As we can all recognize, financing is vital to the success and sustainability of this initiative, and we welcome your views on potential avenues for resource mobilization. So, honorable members of the steering committee, your presence today and your commitment to the work of the coalition add immense value to our collective efforts. If you'll allow me now, let me turn the floor to my co-lead and in this initiative, Rob McCouch, UNICEF Director of Evaluation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alan, and esteemed members of the steering committee. It's such a pleasure to meet you all virtually this time. I must apologize. I'm not quite as formally attired as my esteemed colleague Alan. I'm on vacation at the moment, but this was too important to miss. That said, without going into too much formal detail, allow me to echo what Alan said in terms of really underscoring the importance of our co-leadership, all of us together around the table today, in informing this really important initiative. It's a real pleasure to be joining you and to be co-leading this with Alan and UNDP colleagues. We have a long-standing relationship of collaboration that seems to be getting stronger all the time. I know later, as Alan mentioned, we're going to be hearing the emerging results from the partnership pillar. synthesis. Partnership is a key word because it also is the buzzword for this steering committee. As I've said many, many times in my interactions with members of the UNICEF Executive Board, with donors to UNICEF, with our partners, really assessing how we're doing on the SDGs, it can't just be a United Nations initiative. It must involve and be co-led and in fact led by governments as the primary duty bearers, in our case for the rights of children, but also for the SDGs. So the partnership suffuses everything that we do. Just by way of a very short background, I relatively recently, rejoined UNICEF just under 2 years ago as Director of Evaluation. I had been with UNICEF some years ago as head of the humanitarian portfolio, but I've spent some years at WHO in the UN Secretariat, and prior to that, outside of the UN system, in the private sector, NGOs, and so forth. And one observation that I've had over the years as someone who, when I started on this path of evaluation many years ago, when we were doing regression analyses by hand and we were analyzing qualitative data by hand. Two observations, actually. One is just the complexity that has increased almost exponentially with every year that goes by. Complexity in the world that we're living in, certainly the complexity of the challenges that we're facing and the interaction among those, but also complexity in the information and knowledge environment or ecosystem in which we're operating, just the proliferation of data and information and so forth. And the other pattern is of course, to be slightly cliched, technological progress that in a way that has equipped us like never before with more data to look at. And certainly with increasingly sophisticated tools, such as artificial intelligence, with which to actually to analyze and synthesize the data. These are things that are really having a profound effect on our work, but especially now with just over 6 years left between now and 2030. Now is the time to come together and really harness and leverage these really potent tools together to really assess how we're doing collectively in making progress, getting back on track with the SDGs, and where we can, accelerating progress. So I'm absolutely delighted to be co-leading this with Alan and colleagues, and especially to be doing this together with you all. So it's a real pleasure to be with you today. With that in mind, I believe, as Alan started to say, it would be really good to hear from each of the steering committee members a brief introduction from each of you. And I don't know, Anna, whether you were going to curate that or whether you wanted me to go through the list. It doesn't matter one way or the other.
Rob, I will be pleased to do so because there may be a few changes, and probably I'm the one that has the latest information.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
I start by apologizing for not knowing the correct pronunciation of everyone. But with further ado, let me, with much pleasure, let me call on Her Excellency Ms. Jedre Daltite, Chancellor of the
Hello,
government
good morning,
of
everyone.
Lithuania. Please,
I know
you
there's
have the
this
floor.
complexity of my name is similar to complexity of indicators for SDGs. But Giedre Balčytytė, I'm currently Chancellor of Lithuanian government. I know we have very short time, so I'll try to introduce myself very briefly and maybe to bring to your attention what we would like to bring to this committee, to the work of this committee for consideration. So first of all, yes, briefly about me. I'm bringing international development experience, starting from including such as from UNDP actually and the World Bank Board, but nevertheless private sector as well. And currently also utilizing this experience as a Chancellor of Lithuanian government, which means the key coordinator of government work, government development agenda, country development agenda. And so therefore measuring of the progress overall is very much a task of my concern. Very early from the beginning of the work in the government, we clearly faced numerous crises, as every government in the country, in the world, starting from COVID, but also all the others. What made it very clear for us is that we cannot base our current time decisions based on past information, on statistics purely from last year or from last quarter or similarly. So we clearly understood that the real-time data is something which really would enrich our decisions, or mainly would make them possible when in such a very dynamic and changing environment. So Lithuanian government, of course, started to utilize. We fortunately were having a platform which allowed us to put all our information systems data in one place, and so we could monitor daily changes related to COVID situation and all other related crises. But we made a step forward, which means we transformed our Department of Statistics into National Data Agency, which means it allows us to really utilize almost real-time data, meaning by yesterday's data, not today's, but yesterday's data for overall government decision-making. It changes very much dynamics. It allows us also to very much clearly indicate where we have specific problem of the real time, of the current day, not of yesterday or last year, but also allows us really to use the same indicators to monitor the progress towards achievement one or another objective, which is put as an objective of the government. So clearly, what is clear also with probably SDGs indicators and the progress measuring towards that, and we really understand the very different country settings and possibilities to do so, but very much indicators shows us something which is long ago in the past, and we lack to see the progress towards these objectives which we're putting forward. It means we really have to look for indicators which would show us whether we are on track or we are making a progress towards the specific indicator, or we are, we will learn about achievement of it just at the end of the day, at the end of the 3 years term or even longer term. So I believe that the experience which we gained during this process, and I know we are globally front runners in this area, would be really useful for this setting, for these discussions we are going to have, and our expertise and practices might be very much, I hope, useful in this regard. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't exceed it too much my time.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. Thank you. I'd like to call now on Minister Maria Inés Castillo. Bienvenida, por favor.
Hi, dear colleagues and members of this coalition. My name is Maria Inés Castillo, and it is an honor for me as a Minister of Social Development of Panama to participate as a member of this steering committee, and we thank you once again for the opportunity. As points to highlight in terms of key learning needs, I would like to address the following. Well, first, that the exercise of the voluntary national reports on the SDGs is a true tool to help countries assess and align their public policies with the 2030 agenda. Also, the importance to involve the entire society to achieve SDGs, as a government alone cannot address these challenges. Because of that, building a foundation that aligns the talents and actions of all sectors is essential to ensure that no one is left behind. In terms of accelerating the achievement of the SDGs, we have implemented the Plan Colmena strategy that seeks to combat poverty and inequality through collaboration between civil society, the private sector, and the academia. And as a good practice, we present this initiative to be shared with other countries. On the other hand, in relation to the challenges for Panama, we can suggest emphasizing in two structural challenges that are also common to other countries. The need to have comprehensive information system that inform public policy and therefore for the achievement of the 2030 agenda, generating a correlational look between indicators of the SDGs and promoting the interoperability of institutional system. Although it is true that the agenda established a structure for measuring progress, it is necessary that the member states pay attention to the establishment of programmatic links that articulate the dimensions of sustainable development from the information system and national statistics. In this sense, it is worth mentioning that for the purposes of the participation of all sectors, there is not a standardized way to measure progress. Everyone talks about its impact on the SDGs, but there is a lack of a unique mechanism to prove it. Additionally, the challenge posed by the territorialization of institutional and programmatic efforts to generate comprehensive local development paths articulated with all the actors. This challenge has components associated with building local capacities and generating financial models for the SDGs associated with territorial needs that allow local governments to assume responsibilities in those environments and sectors where it's viable. Once again, we appreciate the opportunity to bring our ideas and perspective to this table, and we are excited to continue this dialogue along with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'd like to call now Ms. Eva del Hoya, Director General for Sustainable Development Policies at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm having some problems with my camera, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Okay, I'm trying to focus the camera to the right place, but anyway, I'll speak and then I'll sort the problem out. Dear Excellencies, dear UNDP, IEO, UNICEF directors, SDG Synthesis Secretariat, dear colleagues, thanks a lot, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks a lot for the invitation to the steering committee. My name is Eva del Hoyo, and I act as a Director General of Sustainable Development Policies in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Madrid. The reason why Spain supports this SDG synthesis exercise is based on the firm commitment of the Spanish cooperation to the 2030 agenda, as we normally show in every single forum. This year, the government of Spain has approved a new law on sustainable development and cooperation and global solidarity, in which the 2030 agenda plays an integral central and indivisible role in the object of the law. Among the key new features, among the features that it incorporates, I will highlight two of them. On the one hand, the incorporation of the commitment to reach the 0.7 target by 2030 of the ODA. On the other hand, the consideration of policy coherence for sustainable development as a fundamental principle of our country's contribution to global development goals, being incorporated in our foreign policy that have an impact on developing countries and global sustainable development, where dialogue with our partner countries and institutions is central, as it is central the accomplishment of SDG 17. In addition, the Spanish cooperation integrates the principles of aid effectiveness, ownership, the main role of the partner countries, inclusive alliances, concentration on impact and results, and mutual accountability. It supports the Global Partnership for Aid Effectiveness, and it promotes the mobilization of resources in alignment with Addis Ababa Action Agenda. All of this is integrated into the main planning instruments of our cooperation, such as the strategic and master plans, country partnership frameworks, and country alliances, as well as strategic partner frameworks we sign with international organizations. The Spanish cooperation considers SDG 17 as a catalytic objective of the action of our development cooperation systems toward the achievement of the 2030 agenda through its target of multilateral partnerships, finance, and capacity buildings. To finish, Spain considered this SDG synthesis exercise, and in particular that one of the Pillar 5 partnerships, as a unique opportunity to draw lessons on how the international sustainable development cooperation system contributes to the advancement of the 2030 agenda. We hope that the SDG 17 synthesis will inform on the capacity of the current cooperation models to achieve the rest of the SDGs. Likewise, we hope that the Spanish cooperation will serve as an example of its commitment to strengthen multi-stakeholder partnerships based on the principles of aid effectiveness, access to financing, and dialogue between countries that promotes policy coherence for sustainable development. In this time, we hope that the exercise will be of interest to participate in the HLPF and SDG Summit. You can really count on Spain. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ms. Eva. I would like to call now Dr. Khan, please, Chief Economist, Director for Economics and Evaluation and Directorate in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom. Welcome.
Thank you. Real pleasure and honor to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Economist and Director of Economics and Evaluation at the FCDO UK, but otherwise a professor at the London School of Economics, and before that at Harvard and other places, having worked on policy and research questions for over 30 years. So the UK is deeply committed to making progress on SDG financing in a way that unlocks more financing. But we also think that finance alone is not sufficient. We need to focus on SDG enablers. And by that, I mean like a focus, a real laser-like focus on measurement. How do we measure our progress? But also in terms of like a focus on how do we make most impactful spending? How do we design programs that are based on cutting-edge frontier analysis and evidence? Ex ante, but and ex post also see that whether these programs are having the most impact that they could have through impact evaluation, but also design and analysis of programs. We also believe that that also requires aligning incentives and creating more accountability structures, both at international level, but also at domestic levels. That's the stuff that I've also worked in. That's the stuff that I'm also, if I'm candid, I think we have some way to go in ensuring that we as a global community are best positioned to make use of our analysis evidence, to align incentives, to design the most impactful program, to achieve the most impact. That's where I personally would also like to contribute the most. So thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. Welcome. I'd like to call now Dr. Joseph Capuno, Undersecretary of the Investment Programming Group in the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines. Welcome, Dr. Capuno. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm happy and honored to be invited to join the steering committee. Thank you to UNDP. Yes, I'm with the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines, which is the socio-economic planning agency of my country. I just joined the government about 11 months ago. I was also teaching in the university before joining the government. One of the things that I discovered as Undersecretary of the Investment Programming Group, which is in charge of evaluating, ex-ante evaluating, or we call it investment appraisal, the big ticket investments of the government. One of the things that I discovered is that we're so good, if I may say so, in ex-ante investment appraisals. We're also quite good in monitoring the implementation of these projects and also how they align and contribute towards achievements of the SDGs. But what we lack is in producing sufficient knowledge and using such knowledge to attribute impact of these investments to to the achievements of SDGs and other development goals in my country. And that's what we're trying to fix while we're in office. We're on a 6-year term in government. So what we plan to achieve immediately in the next 2 years to produce a body of evidence, impact evidence, ex post evaluation evidence, to inform our what we call a Philippine Development Plan. That's our medium-term development plan, which will be up for updating 2 years down the line, and then replicate that towards the end of the administration, which is in 2028. Hopefully, if we can, jumpstart that process, we could, make wide use of more evidence. Yeah, those that directly contribute or indirectly contribute to the SDGs and the development goals of the country. And I'm looking forward, to learning from your experiences in your country and whatever advice that you can share with us to achieve that end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Capuno. Welcome. It's my pleasure now to call Mr. Helge Ostenweisten, the Director of the Department for Evaluation in the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. Welcome, Helge. Helge, you're muted and we can't see you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I'm sorry that you can't see me because my camera is on, but as long as you can hear me, I trust that is sufficient. So anyway, Excellencies, dear colleagues, this is an important initiative for a number of reasons. I guess the most important reason is that in general, it is extremely important to be guided by information and knowledge and understanding when optimizing policies. And in the SDG process, I think it's important in particular because there is a notion of understanding and information and knowledge out there that has not been pieced together. And this is a wonderful opportunity to piece the information together in order to identify some very important lessons learned that can help us to optimize policies towards 2030. So we are in this because we think that this initiative can help us to do so, to create and develop lessons learned to optimize the policies that is necessary to implement in order to accomplish the SDG agenda. As we all know, there has been setbacks, COVID and the war in Europe and so on and so forth. And this makes it even more important to piece together the information that we have available already in order to optimize the goal attainment of the SDG agenda. So in that spirit, I hope that this, and we hope that this initiative will be successful. We will certainly do our part in order to help it to be successful. And I wish the initiative personally also all the best. Thank you. Thanks. Back to you, Ana Rosa.
Thank you so much, Helge. Welcome. I see that we just have Ambassador Agnes join us. Let me just confirm she is indeed connected. Ambassador, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I've connected. Thanks. I'm sorry. I was looking for the link. I'm on holiday,
That's okay. Ambassador Agnes from Malawi. It's a real pleasure, Your Excellency. Please, the floor is yours for your introduction.
Oh, so my name is Ambassador Agnes Chimbiri Molande. I'm in Malawi, so I'm on holiday. the permanent representative of Malawi to the United Nations. So allow me not to use the video so that I can just use the audio. Yeah, so happy to join you on this important coalition on synthesis analysis. And as a member, steering committee member of this one, it will be very useful for us to be part of it. Certainly, I would like our Minister of Finance to be the member, but we are yet to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It's a real pleasure to made it right on time. Thank you. I would like to call now on Ms. Sarah Kruger-Falk, Executive Director of UN Global Compact Network Denmark and Chair of the 2030 panel. She is leading this position together with the Honorable Member of Parliament, the Danish Parliament, Ms. Marianne Bigum. Sarah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us the word, Ana Rosa. And thank you also for the opportunity to join this coalition. And we actually think that it's quite fantastic that we're able to join the coalition in partnership between the stakeholders in society and the members of parliament. And I will explain that because I'm co-joining this coalition together with Marianne Bigum. She is the member of parliament and she's also the chair of a network of members of parliament from all parties. And we have representatives from all parties that are working together to advance the Sustainable Development Goals in a Danish context. And I am chairing the civil society, the business, the academia panel that's advising the government on the SDGs. And we, in the 2030 panel, are represented by, of course, academia. We have business representatives. We have a lot of private sector, civil society organizations. We have philanthropic funds. So we have a broad variety of influential actors, also from leading the municipalities and the regions in Denmark. And what we are doing in this collaboration is that we are actually working to advance the knowledge in society about how to advance the SDGs, but we're also working on doing it in a practical way and trying to understand, so what is necessary to really reach the SDGs, and what does it take from business, what does it take from the municipalities, what does it take from government, what does it take from the education system, the academia, to reach these goals. And we are trying to work both on raising knowledge, but also working with our own organizations and our own communities and all in order to advance and figure out what the challenges might be. One important thing that I just want to show, and I know that I have a blur, but we made this very, very strong publication together with Statistics Denmark. It's called Our Goals. And we made 197 specific KPIs for a Danish context. And that's because when we look at the international rankings and KPIs on how we monitor progress towards the SDGs, we always ranking very high in Denmark. We don't have many mothers dying in labor. We don't have children that are uneducated, but we have very high levels of consumption. We import a lot of produced goods from around the world. We have a lot of waste and we emit a lot of CO2. So we were really trying to also try to contextualize what does it take to drive change within the Danish society. We're also working with how to impact assess new legislation. It was given in the Danish action plan for the SDGs. It was noted that all new legislation have to be impact assessed against the SDGs. And it's not only assessing what's positive impact given new law would have, but also assessing how would it affect negatively. So if we look at a new road that's built, it will give more access to education or people access to get to work, but it would have negative impact on biodiversity and life on land, for example. So try to have these two sides of the coin, and understanding progress in one specific goal can be the opposite for other goals. And I think that's also an important discussion in this coalition. So what we would like to bring in here is of course the strong partnership between the society and the government, and how we need to work together even closer to understand the issues on the ground and find solutions on the ground that we can inspire, but also looking at negative impacts and how we are working deliberately to reduce negative impacts in order to reach the goals. So that was all from me. Thank you very much. I look forward to joining the discussions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Welcome. Okay, we have a couple of countries more, but I'm not 100% sure we have the representatives connected. There have been some technical issues, but we were expecting the ambassador Honey from Nigeria, permanent mission. I'm not sure if any representatives from Nigeria have been able to join.
I think I saw that they have, Anna, but I could be mistaken. About midway through the introductions.
Yes, I think they may have had an IT problem. So I will call on the representative from Sierra Leone, which was also having a problem. Mr. Peter Yaba, was he able to connect? No. Rose Orabala from Nigeria.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for calling out. Yes, we're expecting His Excellency Tijani Bande. That's the permanent representative to the UN for Nigeria. I'm not sure if he's online, because we're expecting him to join. Unfortunately, I can't speak on his behalf. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Anyebu from the Permanent Mission of Nigeria, New York. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, welcome. Yes, if you can connect your camera, that would be ideal.
Okay, just give me one moment to change my connection. I'll be back. Just a minute, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Online interventions can always be a bit tricky.
So maybe while we're waiting for David, Anna, I believe the next item after the introductions is a brief presentation by you on the overview of the coalition. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we'll move directly into that after the introductions.
Yes. Thank you.
I thought I'd use our little gap in time profitably and efficiently. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rob.
Rosa, if I can make the suggestion, why don't you go ahead with your presentation, and we'll invite David to join us for an introduction at the conclusion once his IT systems have improved. Is that all right?
I see David just connected, Alan. So David, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Good morning once again from New York. Thank you very much. Apologies, I had a little hiccups, my connection. It's just to appreciate the convening of this very useful meeting towards mobilizing action for the acceleration of the achievement of the goals. Of course, my delegation, we are fully committed towards any move or any alliance that accelerates the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. My ambassador, permanent representative, unfortunately, he's engaged in an official assignment and he's out of station at the moment. And apparently, of course, you are aware that my country is going through a transition, just went through a transition rather, and the new government is only 3 weeks old, and president at the moment is in France attending the finance conference as well. So it's just to give an overview where we are at the moment, and of course we are excited to work in any direction that's, you know, as earlier emphasized, that channels or mobilizes action towards the acceleration of the SDGs. Having coordinated and having tabled the resolution on strengthening voluntary national reviews through country-led evaluations, we understand the importance of mobilizing action to evaluate the evidence-based evaluation to ascertain the challenges of countries and to mobilize action. For us, as we also mobilize action in the preparatory meetings for the SDG Summit in September and the Summit of the Future, our priority is we want all actions towards the SDG to be centered to have as its core the eradication of poverty. Of course, in Africa, with the projection of population rise exponentially and with multi-dimensional poverty on the increase, we believe poverty should eradication of poverty and financing of the SDGs should be central in what we do. So we are excited about any coalition in this regard, but then again we are with feedback from our capital on the way forward as we work with capital. So just to express our appreciation and yes, just to express our appreciation, really. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure here. Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, honorable committee members, we still have one member that unfortunately could not make today, and that is Minister Francis Kaikai, Minister Francis Kaikai, Minister of Planning and Economic Development for Sierra Leone. Unfortunately, his representative is facing some technical difficulties, so we won't be able to hear from him right now, but perhaps a bit later. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go straight to a quick presentation on the coalition. Let me share my screen with you. I hope you're able to see it. You're able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Honorable members of the steering committee and partners, it is my privilege to present to you today on behalf of the SDG Synthesis Coalition Secretariat and its multiple partners, a brief overview of the coalition's objective, progress to date, and expectations, including the roles of this steering committee. So why are evaluation offices involved in synthesis? When COVID hit, the UNDP Evaluation Office saw itself, like many other evaluation offices, forced to conduct evaluations remotely, which led us to look closer into the evaluative evidence we already had available and consider working more with meta evaluations or evidence synthesis. We discovered a substantial amount of evaluative evidence already generated on the SDGs. Challenge was to filter through the noise to get to the most credible evidence of what worked or not to accelerate development. And in the process, identify evidence gaps to then produce further evaluations. This image illustrates our very initial scoping exercise we conducted in May of 2022. This is not the complete picture. believe me, this grew a lot. We identified at that time tens of thousands of evaluations to synthesize, over 60,000 UN evaluations alone, not to mention impact evaluations and systematic reviews. After we started the partnership pillar synthesis, we discovered a lot more. So given this multitude of evidence, how could we expect member states, UN agencies, decision makers, and even evaluators ourselves to make sense of it all in a timely and credible fashion? What evidence could we trust to be of credible quality to pass critical appraisals? Yes, we now have ChatGPT and similar artificial intelligence tools that could potentially help. But how to trust all the fake news AIs feed off and the multiple cases of hallucinations and manipulations and bugs? We needed our own AI and a lot more. We did build our own AI. You may have heard of AIDA, our artificial intelligence development analytics tool, which you can talk more about it in another opportunity. Evaluative evidence synthesis was the way we found to help us make sense of this vast amount of evidence, providing greater confidence and minimizing bias through critical appraisals to enable us to identify what works, determine what should be avoided, generate coherent and rigorous learning, and promote lessons to accelerate the SDGs. Additionally, the methodological rigor of the synthesis is proving to prevent the overstatement of the efficacy of any one policy or one program based on a single example or sometimes a single evaluation. So recognizing the ambitious challenge at hand, we understood we could not accomplish it alone. We required partners to form an evaluative evidence coalition to generate this comprehensive synthesis. To ensure the usefulness of the synthesis, they needed to consider the key principles of the SDGs, such as universality, leaving no one behind, and the multidimensionality of sustainable development, encompassing economic, social, and environmental aspects. Therefore, collaboration among UN entities became absolutely crucial, which aligns with the call from the UN Secretary General and member states that always asked of us to work and deliver as one in a more integrated, systemically, and harmonized manner based on the principles and the pillars of the SDGs. However, we quickly recognized the need to extend beyond UN entities and evaluation offices. We required a much broader coalition. With a global call to diverse stakeholders and networks, the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition was formed and continues to attract growing attention and support. The SDG synthesis was established with the primary objective of contributing to the acceleration of the SDGs by synthesizing robust evidence on what has worked, what has not worked, and why, within different contexts to advance development. All this with a focus on highlighting key insights regarding barriers and enablers related to the achievements, or lack thereof, and generating lessons to accelerate progress towards the SDGs before 2030. On this slide, you see various of the 42 UN entities and affiliates that are involved in the SDG pillars. We are grateful and to some extent even overwhelmed by the rapidly growing interest of entities that came together and contribute to the synthesis, which speaks loudly to the importance and timeliness of this initiative to get the SDGs on track. We also have various member states and other stakeholders involved in the pillars in different ways. In the interest of time, I only wanted to quickly show you a few of them. We're missing here Our key partners from civil society, foundations, different networks, and private sector, they're also becoming increasingly involved in the coalition. We hope that over the next few weeks and months, more member states, partners, and funders will also join the initiative. So the partners contribute to the coalition through a governance structure developed for transparency, efficiency, coherence, and accountability. The steering committee, consists of high-level officials to give the right prominence to the initiative. This committee is expected to steer the coalition, validate key learning needs for the synthesis, help the coalition mobilize the necessary funds and in-kind support for the synthesis, and secure broad member state participation, highlighting utility and learning to promote the uptake. What's most important, the uptake of the lessons in the strategic forums, such as the high-level political forums, the upcoming SDG Summit, and the Summit of the Future of 2024. The Secretariat, currently led by UNDP Evaluation Office with the support of UNICEF Evaluation Office, coordinates partners, meetings, events, and manages the recruitment of teams, finances, and administrative matters. Each pillar has a management group composed of the most committed partners responsible for managing the exercise and also trying to mobilize the required human and financial resources with the support of the Secretariat and the Steering Committee. Members of the management group also assist in identifying experts for the technical advisory panels and support, and they also provide support to the synthesis teams to access data and evidence to ensure timely delivery of the products. And lastly, the technical advisory panels assigned to each pillar synthesis consist of diverse subject matter and methodological experts from around the world. Their role is to quality assure the synthesis, ensuring its methodological rigor, conceptual clarity, and accuracy, particularly pertaining to the findings of the synthesis. The steering committee in particular plays possibly the most crucial role in the SDG Synthesis Coalition. Firstly, the committee has the role of steering the learning needs of the synthesis, ensuring that they address the most pressing knowledge gaps and learning requirements to accelerate the goals. Secondly, the committee can assist with ensuring the political relevance of the synthesis lessons in particular. This involves critically reviewing and validating the lessons and ensuring they contribute meaningfully to global SDG discussions. Thirdly, the committee will play a pivotal role in disseminating and promoting the lessons and ensuring their valuable insights reach a wide audience, including policymakers, practitioners, and other stakeholders involved in SDG implementation. Additionally, the committee is asked to be actively involved in assisting to mobilize financial and human resources for the synthesis, recognizing the need for adequate funding and capacity to support the coalition's work. Lastly, the committee should help to promote broad participation in the coalition, engaging a broad number of member states and stakeholders to actively contribute to the coalition's objective. Above all, the uptake of the lessons and the translation of the evidence to national contexts. This slide highlights the current estimate costing and funding gaps for your consideration of strategies on how to help us mobilize additional resources. The regional estimate by a professional company was around $7 million. But in conversation with the management groups and methodologists, we are trying to think of exploring ways to limit the scoping of the synthesis to prioritize what we can cover, adjust the methodology as possible, and advance the use of artificial intelligence to see how to reduce the cost of the synthesis. But we still need considerable resources to timely deliver credible and useful lessons, and we count on your help on these efforts. We present an ambitious timeline, as you can see here, to carry out and disseminate the 5-pillar synthesis by 2025. It is intentionally ambitious to allow countries at least 5 years to implement the lessons, to consider the lessons and turn them into recommendations that speak to their national contexts before 2030. As you can see in this slide, the preliminary results of the first synthesis will be available for the high-level political forum in July, and the final lessons will be available for the SDG summit in September. The synthesis of the other pillars, the people, planet, peace, and prosperity, will commence soon. And with adequate resources, we expect to be able to present the results of this fourth synthesis by 2024. These are some of the upcoming events we hope the steering committee members will actively be involved. We will have a voluntary national review lab on the 12th of July, where we'll present the findings of the analysis we conducted of all VNRs with a focus on the SDG 17. This was part of the partnership pillar synthesis. Then we are invited as a coalition to attend the Science Special Event Day promoted by UNDP and UNDESA to discuss the use of evidence for decision making. But the key event in July in the high-level political forum that we hope to count on all of you as speakers will happen on 17th of July at 6:30 p.m. And of course, we hope you will join us as champions and take leadership to make sure the final lessons of these syntheses get featured and broadly disseminated in the UN General Assembly SDG Summit in September in New York and in the Summit of the Future in 2024. Honorable committee members and partners, thank you for your attention. I will be happy to answer any questions now or after the presentation of Thomas de Hoop, our team leader from the American Institutes for Research, that will briefly present the progress to date of the work being developed around the partnership pillar synthesis. As Thomas presents, distinguished committee members, I kindly request you to consider the fact that the current stage of development of this synthesis is not yet as advanced as it will be for the high-level political forum in July. A significant portion of the evidence will continue to be cross-referenced and advanced from now until 17th of July. So what we would be presenting today is still in a preliminary form. The language to be presented in the high-level political forum in July will also possess a higher degree of precision, particularly regarding the lessons, which is our key aimed contribution. The same refinement will take place for the SDG Summit when we'll have fully completed the exercise. The methodological protocol and results thus far have undergone meticulous quality assurance by the Technical Advisory Panel and the management group. Nevertheless, as part of the coalition and members of the steering committee, you also serve as critical friends and integral part of the synthesis team. So please assist us in ensuring the relevance of the findings derived from the synthesis, and most importantly, whether the lessons are reaching the level of utility required for global discussions surrounding SDG accelerations. We kindly request your valuable insights on any changes and improvements that should be considered to enhance the caliber of the synthesis lessons. Thank you. I'll stop here and either open for questions or pass it to Thomas. Are there any immediate questions, or shall we go straight to AIR's presentation?
I think our esteemed colleagues have been bedazzled by the clarity of your presentation, Anna. And I know everyone is so busy that we're sensitive of the time. So thanks so much for that. And over to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Rob. Let me try to share my screen. You all see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Highly esteemed steering group members. My name is Thomas de Hoop. I'm the AIR team leader of the SDG Partnership Pillar Synthesis. It's a large team of people we're working with, and we're excited to present some emerging lessons to you today. So we started this exercise with 4 key research questions in mind. The first one is really which SDG 17 targets are currently on track and which are lagging. The second one is which countries have made the most progress on SDG 17 and why. In addition to that, we focus on which policies and programs are most effective. And then finally, we also examine how and why those policies and programs are more successful. Today, I'm going to focus on 3 of these 4 research questions. I think we all know that the world is facing considerable challenges currently, for example, related to climate change, related to the energy crisis. There's an ongoing debt crisis. And unfortunately, as a result, and I think that has been recently been communicated as well, only very few of the SDG targets are on track. So today we're really going to focus primarily on how to accelerate progress to make sure that we can actually make sure that more of those targets are going to be on track. So we're going to focus on 3 of the 4 research questions.
Muted, Thomas.
Yeah, I did that by accident. I'm going to give a brief overview of the methods before I dive into findings, but we're not going to speak about the methods in detail because, as Anna mentioned, we have done significant quality assurance regarding the methods with external. Just to give you an overview, for the evidence synthesis of impact and performance in process evaluations, we screened partially through artificial intelligence 25,157 studies. Of those, we only screened the abstract of those. Then we screened the full text of 1,830 studies, and we screened 285 studies that were eventually eligible for inclusion. In addition to that, we selected case studies of specific countries based on a statistical analysis to draw lessons on what works. And as you can see here, the names of these countries, those are countries that are specific really for specific regions. And we have a large diversity of countries that we're focusing on specifically. Based on the lessons from those case studies, as well as the synthesis of the impact evaluations, we drew lessons on a number of SDG 17 targets. And just to remind all of you, on SDG 17 specifically, we focus on trade finance and technology, as well as capacity building and systemic issues. So for the preliminary emerging findings, I just want to focus at first on the synthesis of the impact and performance process evaluations, and we're triangulating those findings with the findings from the specific case studies. I first want to start with trade specifically. And this will not come as a surprise to many of you, but what we see is that trade liberalization can lead to increases in exports It can also lead to improvements in innovation, specifically in middle-income countries. At the same time, its effects also seem to depend on context and the type of trade liberalization. What we clearly see in the evidence is that regional free trade agreements have positive effects on exports, for example, in China. But at the same time, we also see that preferential trade agreements, for example, between the EU and various countries in sub-Saharan Africa, do not seem to result in export increases in sub-Saharan Africa for various reasons. From our case studies, we also see that Uzbekistan has really made a lot of progress in economic growth, as well as various other indicators after joining a regional trade agreement. So in that respect, we really see that there is some triangulation there that gives reassurance of some of the impact evaluation findings. What we also see is that entry into the World Trade Organizations has positive effects on the number of products traded, but not on the average trade volume per product. So the findings are rather nuanced there. Tariff reductions appear to result in increased innovation. At the same time, we also know that tariffs are very important for many low and middle income countries to increase its And for that reason, it's also important to focus on finance components of the SDG 17 objectives. What we see there is that tax revenue is really important, and that value-added taxes and nudging people to pay taxes can contribute to increasing government revenue in taxes. We see, for example, that in Madagascar, improved tax collection and revenues followed democratic elections and improved governments, also suggesting that improved governance by itself can help countries increase its tax revenue. We also see that exports itself, and we see the interactions with trade, and we see that Peru, for example, is one of the case studies, could increase the sustainability of its debts by increasing its exports, giving more sustainability to its debt, ability to pay off its debts. With respect to a focus on climate change, what we also see is that green finance arrangements can actually have small but positive effects on green innovation. Importantly, though, I want to highlight that these are small effects. So it's likely that more is needed to further accelerate those effects. We also see that private sector investments in broadband and high-speed internet can stimulate innovation, in addition to the green finance effects on green innovation, and especially in middle-income countries with large markets, for example, in China and India. What we see here is that private sector involvement can be particularly relevant through public-private partnerships. These are some of the findings related to what kind of programs and policies and interventions can accelerate progress toward SDG 17 objectives. One other key question, which we examined through an evidence synthesis of performance and process evaluations primarily focused on UN evaluations, is how and why can partnerships lead to impacts and accelerated SDG achievements. What we see here is that global and regional partnerships oftentimes achieve objectives at the output levels, for example, through experience sharing, but not necessarily at the outcome level. For example, changes in national policies. There's a lot of interest in mutual learning through connection and experience sharing, but at the same time, there's also often a lack of problem analysis. There's misalignment of indicators, incentives, and limited incentives and unequal power relationships also compromise the ability of some of these initiatives to achieve outcomes. And as a result, these initiatives do not always result in policy change. What we do see is that triangular cooperation, for example, through South-South partnerships, can lead to national ownership and trust, and enable countries to explore mutual interests to sustain and scale outcomes for impacts through partnerships. This high degree of ownership can also include connecting with funding modalities to enable autonomy, and this can incentivize long-term commitments. So we see a little bit of a larger positive effects potentially on outcomes from triangular cooperation and South-South partnerships than on relationships with larger and unequal power relationships. What we also see is that programs as well as evaluations linked to SDG 17 often insufficiently address equity. They often only focus on gender, and impact evaluations by themselves almost do not discuss equity at all. With all of this in mind, we come to a number of key emerging lessons that triangulate the evidence from each of these findings. We see that SDG 17 overall achieving the objectives requires more effective global cooperation and multi-stakeholder partnerships. Current programs and policies often have positive but small effects, but are often not sufficient to accelerate progress. We also see that accelerating exports in middle-income countries requires a stronger focus on regional trade agreements than on preferential trade agreements. We also see that potentially communicating with partners to better align green finance initiatives with incentives is likely to help strengthen the effects of green finance on green innovation. We also see that value-added taxes, as well as nudging people to pay their taxes, can increase government revenue, but those effects seem to be relatively small. And we see that South-South horizontal cooperation based on equitable power relationships is likely to accelerate progress toward SDG 17 objectives because of trust building. On this slide, finally, we see that increasing internet access, especially in rural areas, requires close collaboration between governments and private sector partners. We also see that SDG 17 programs need a larger emphasis on the specific needs of marginalized populations. At this point, both programs as well as evaluations have a limited emphasis on equity. And as a result, women, youth, as well as disabled people may run the risk of being left behind. Also, there remains a need for more rigorous impact performance and process evaluations, especially across more diverse settings, to accelerate learning, especially when they have a stronger focus on equity. We also see that learning about the environmental impacts of SDG 17 policies, currently with a focus on climate change, requires analysis not just of SDG 17 or any other SDG goal, but specifically of the linkages between different SDG objectives, and that making evidence-informed decisions about investments in SDG 17 requires a stronger focus on cost-effectiveness analysis. Currently, only very few evaluations focus on either costs or cost-effectiveness. So thank you all, highly esteemed committee members. It was really a pleasure to present this. Really looking forward to any comments you may have. Thank you so much.
So, Thomas, thank you very much for the presentation. Distinguished steering committee members, we have promised a hard stop at the halfway point of the hour. As a consequence, we're going to make a change in the agenda, and that is we're going to be setting up a subsequent meeting of the steering committee after the high-level political forum, where we will have an opportunity to go into depth on the other 4 pillars. That's going to provide an opportunity now in the time remaining to field a couple of questions and wrap up as promised by the half hour. So at this point, I think the first hand that came up was Eva Del Hoya. Perhaps I can ask you to go ahead and take the floor and ask your question or make your comment, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I think you can see me now. Another camera was pointing at me, so I was going mad with the with my position, but I found the right way. Just very quickly, we really liked the presentation, and we have a lot of interest in lesson 1 about global cooperation and multi-stakeholder partnership, as well as lesson 5 regarding triangular and South-South cooperation. My question goes in this way. SDG is the catalyzing mechanism for joint international efforts towards the implementation and accomplishment of 2030 agenda. How do we ensure with this synthesis that it will result on a balanced analysis between private sector efforts that we see that have been presented, trade, connectivity, and so on, as well as public sector efforts within finance for development, multi-stakeholder partnerships, policy dialogue, coherence, and so on. Thank you very much. And thanks for the presentation.
Thomas, why don't you think about the response to that? Let me call David Anyegbo from Nigeria, because he also had his hand up, and then you can respond to both. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just to commend the insightful presentation by Mr. Thomas. I had the mention of exports, you know, when he talked about what regional coalition has led to boosting export, but unfortunately in the sub-Saharan region of Africa, that doesn't seem to be the case from the graph he shared. I wanted to ask, of course, we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, and from our own engagements, what we realize is the lack of adequate support for local manufacturing is particularly critical to why we've not had exports in this regard. A boost in exports as expected, despite the existence of such an important regional agreement. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what could be done to actually boost local production. From our own analysis. We know international support for local production is critical. And then again, you talked about tax and how tax has played a very key role in Madagascar, how they've been able to boost the economy as regards the SDG 17 evaluation. And of course, we led the tax resolution here in the UN, and we tabled the resolution which was adopted by the UN on last year, December. And we believe African economy is being shortchanged at the moment. If we can block the financial leakages. Yes, we commend the suggestion, the Bridgestone initiative by the SecGen and the stimulus plan to actually get developed countries to provide $500 billion and to convert short-term loans to long-term loans at low interest. It's commendable, but if we can block these financial leakages, especially in the area of tax, where African economies are being shortchanged, we believe, of course, I also like to get your thoughts on having an international tax convention such that the multinational corporations will pay fair tax while domiciled in African countries. And it's really, our president made that commitment in his inaugural speech to, and is also in the interest of the multinational corporations for ease of doing business. Because if you know you have a document that says exactly what it should be, then it helps your insight when you are actually going to invest. So just to get your thoughts on these areas and what can be done to support local tax and blocking the financial leakages and getting the requisite cooperation as well to repatriate illicit financial flows and assets. Because of course, we have the issue of corruption, and to adequately combat corruption, it requires an international dimension. So this is our story and narrative as regards SDG 17. We need that support in illicit financial flows. For you have these funds, they go out and it takes a long time before the funds and assets are repatriated eventually. And even when when repatriated, beg your pardon, the accruing interest in some instances are not taken into account, even after 30 years or thereabout, because obviously $3 billion 30 years ago is not $3 billion in today's economy. So these are some of our peculiarities. So just to get your reaction on this. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. Thomas, I'm going to indulge one last question before you respond. Helge of Sweden, I think you wanted to make a comment or question as well.
No, thank you so much, Alan, and thank you so much, Thomas, for a very interesting and insightful presentation. My question is about methodology. You briefly mentioned that you started off with a universe of roughly 25,000 publications, and you ended up with a universe or a sample of 285, if I'm not mistaken. Can you sort of share your assessment to which extent you think that this has also consequences for the validity of the findings? And if so, do you foresee any sort of mitigating action to increase and expand the sample in your research?
Okay, Thomas, you have 3 tough questions and 5 minutes to put it all together for us. So please, back to you.
Thank you so much for those very insightful questions. I'm going to try to keep this sweet and short while still trying to be informative. The first question was really about, I think, how to ensure that private and public sector incentives are aligned for achieving some of the SDG 17 goals. And I think it also related to triangular cooperation and South-South cooperation. I think one way to address this question is, for example, by focusing on the role of building trusts. And what we see clearly from the evidence is that trust building is often more successful when it comes to equal power relationships and South-South cooperation. And I can see that similar mechanisms could play a role, for example, in collaboration between public and private sector partners, where trust building can be essential. I don't think that necessarily answers the full question, and this holds for everything. All the questions you ask also give us like ideas to go back into the data and really like assess this in somewhat more detail, because we don't necessarily have the full evidence ready. But if there's specific interest in these kinds of questions, this is like an invitation for ourselves to basically go back into the data and see whether there's more available on this specific question on how to align public and private sector incentives, for example. And I think the same answer holds a little bit for the second question. Just one note is that we do see in general that like regional free trade agreements do seem to work specifically in middle-income countries, and I think in that respect, it's a really valid point to hear about the manufacturing capacity across sub-Saharan Africa, which is of course a concern in many low-income countries. I don't necessarily have an immediate solution for how to increase that manufacturing capacity. What we do see is that regional free trade agreements are clearly like more successful than preferential trade agreements at this point. And what we see in particular in our data is that there do seem to be like questions about the ability of low-income countries to meet the demands of preferential trade agreements, because it requires a lot of like manufacturing capacity, but also regulations to actually be able to export to many countries when we're talking about preferential trade agreements. We see that's often not the case. I think for the question about manufacturing, I think to some extent that really requires us to link SDG 17 with the prosperity pillar of the SDGs. I know without having looked at the evidence in detail that there is a lot of interest currently on how to potentially improve industrial policy across many countries, that there's renewed interest in that. I cannot say that I'm an expert in that field necessarily, but it is, again, something that we can look into in our data to see whether there are these interlinkages where potentially trade agreements can be more successful in sub-Saharan Africa if industrial policy could play a role, or I don't know. It's hard to say at this point. I do think the illicit trade flows are a very valid concern. I think we don't necessarily have evidence on that. I think that there is a clear evidence gap there. We're only just starting to explore, I think, with research and evaluations that field, and something to see whether we can gather more evidence on that in our existing studies. In terms of the evidence and how we moved from 25,000 to about 185 studies, let me just highlight one thing here. One thing that's very important when it comes to evidence synthesis is that we critically appraise the evidence and that we use very clear inclusion criteria. We arrived at the 25,000 studies to screen based on a comprehensive search strategy. By no means of the imagination that we expect that any of those 25,000 studies, that all of those 25,000 studies were relevant. There was just a small likelihood for each of these evaluations that they were relevant for SDG 17. So the first stage was really to do a quick check based on a 2-minute read of each and every abstract to see whether or not the study was relevant. And at some point, we could, through artificial intelligence, also estimate the likelihood of remaining studies to be relevant or not. And we didn't have to screen with humans the remaining studies anymore. And then I want to just highlight that we did critical quality appraisal to make sure that each of the studies was actually of sufficient quality to be included. So we only included studies from the impact evaluation side that had a credible identification strategy, either an experimental or a quasi-experimental study. If you think about that, 185 impact evaluations, that's a lot of evidence for this SDG. It's a lot more actually than we initially expected. So it's not so much that we want to increase the sample size, it's actually a very, if usually evidence synthesis include 25 impact evaluations maybe. And that is a common theme in impact evaluations, whereas 185 is really a substantial evidence base. On performance and process evaluation side, we had about slightly more than 100 performance and process evaluations. Again, that's a substantial evidence base for performance and process evaluation. So we wanted to make sure that we were both comprehensive as well as making sure that we also kept it manageable. Of course, we could have increased our scope. That's a different story. We could have broadened our inclusion criteria, but in all likelihood, we would not have been able to present these findings to you at this point in time.
Thomas, thank you very much, and appreciate also very much the several questions that were raised. Colleagues, we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up the Q&A part right now. I want to thank Thomas for the presentation, and of course, all of you for your bearing with us to go through what is, as we can see, a quite complex series of challenges for us. My regrets to the co-chairs for the other 4 pillars that we didn't have time today to get a presentation on your update. We will set a future meeting with the steering committee to do so. Ana Rosa had mentioned to me that we did have a representation from our last committee member from Sierra Leone. I don't know whether Shikabangura is online and would like to say hello on behalf of the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development. If so, you can do so quickly. I don't see you in the chat, but if you are still here, we very much appreciate your participation and are very pleased that Sierra Leone has joined us also in this effort. I'm sorry, please.
Yes. Hello. Yes, I'm here, Shikabangura. I came a little
please.
late. Yes, thank you so much, for this very important occasion. Yes, I've been following up, with the presentation in the tail end of it. I appreciate it so much. This is really, really useful. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your participation. We really appreciate that you're with us on the steering committee. We look forward to you and Minister Kaikai participating with us in the future. In order to wrap things up, Rob, can I turn it to you just to go ahead and give a quick close for us? And we'll, of course, be back in contact with all of you in terms of regular updates on the steering committee, planning for the high-level political forum coming up, and the next meetings. We invite you all for additional questions to go ahead and put them to our secretariat so that we can continue this dialogue. Rob, you want to wrap us up then?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alan. And thanks, Thomas, for the excellent presentation, Anna, for the excellent facilitation, and of course, all of you esteemed members of this committee. I already, as I started saying at the outset, I came out of my vacation to join this meeting because it was too important to miss. I'm even more energized now hearing the various inputs that you all have provided and what each of you is going to bring to the table. I'm not going to list these, but you could probably tell I was taking copious notes. I'm really, really excited and honored to be part of this with you all, and really look forward to this journey together in the months, the many months ahead. But thank you again very, very much. Please enjoy the rest of your summer. And I look forward to meeting you all again very soon after the high-level panel. So thank you so much, and be well.
Thank you, Rob. So this concludes our first steering committee meeting, and thank all of you for your participation. And as Rob said, please enjoy the rest of your day and your holidays as well. And we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.